Have you ever wondered what happens when someone spends all their energy trying to disprove you, only to find undeniable evidence that you were never the problem? What does it feel like when the investigator becomes the one exposed? Not by vengeance or retaliation, but by your unwavering authenticity, chosen one. This is where we begin. Right now. Someone is pacing floors they used to walk with confidence. Their chest is heavy. Their pride is bruised. And their illusion of control is unraveling. Why? Because everything they tried to use against you has become a mirror revealing their own misjudgment. They weren't ready for the reality that you actually are who you say you are. No mask, no gimmick, no hidden agenda, just a rare, consistent truth that can't be imitated or explained away. They assumed your grace was a performance, your discipline, an act, your peace, a front. But what they found was something terrifying to the ego: purity under pressure. And now they can't unsee it. They weren't content with rumors or assumptions. They created scenarios to test your integrity. They questioned your friends, dug into your past, and staged moments meant to make you choose between your principles and temptation. What drove all this? A deep-seated belief. No one could be as genuine as you appear. If they could prove you were pretending, then their own manipulations could be justified. If you were fake, then everyone was. But their theory is crumbling. Every trap they set has only made your authenticity more undeniable. The worst part for them, you passed all their tests without even realizing you were being tested. Their obsession has hit a wall, because the truth is, you're not playing a game. You're just being yourself. And that truth is unraveling their entire self-image. The deeper pain isn't that you're genuine. It's that your existence exposes how much they've compromised their own integrity. Meanwhile, someone else is watching this collapse unfold in silence, battling the regret of ever doubting you. And a third is still pretending they don't care, while secretly praying your name doesn't come up. Because every mention burns like divine conviction. Comment 777 if you've ever felt watched, tested, or misunderstood, only to have your truth stand taller than any defense you could give. And to all of you who have supported this journey through your presence, prayers, or super thanks, I honor you, whether you gave or simply showed up with an open heart. Thank you. You are part of this sacred circle of truth and vindication. Now, let's enter the mind of the one who tried to ruin you, unaware that they were walking straight into a divine setup that would reveal not your flaws, but your favor, God's chosen ones. Someone just realized you were always genuine. Now they're humiliated. They weren't satisfied with whispers or surface-level doubts. They orchestrated entire performances to test the very fabric of your soul. Quietly, they manipulated conversations around you, pressured your closest friends with veiled inquiries, and retraced your past like investigators on assignment, desperate to uncover a flaw that would confirm their suspicions. Some planted traps tailored to your weaknesses. Others staged moral dilemmas designed to push you toward compromise. It wasn't curiosity. It was a coordinated mission to corner your spirit and prove that your purity was a polished performance, not a persistent truth. But why such obsession? What fear did your consistency awaken in them? Was it possible that your integrity illuminated their double lives too brightly? That your peace unbought, unbothered, exposed the false calm they performed for the world? They studied you like scholars dissecting a rare specimen, because somewhere in their hearts, A question grew unbearable. What if someone like you really could exist? What if unwavering goodness wasn't a myth? The idea that someone might walk through betrayal, poverty, loneliness, and favor without selling their soul, it shattered their fragile justifications for compromise. Isn't it dangerous to confront the existence of someone who refuses to bend, even when bending is easier? Joseph's brothers, filled with jealousy and disbelief, did the same. His dream felt offensive because it implied innocence and favor beyond their understanding. They sold him into slavery, convinced that humiliation would humble him. But in Genesis 50-20, Joseph tells them, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." How many times have your enemies tried to rewrite your story before it reached the throne room? How many traps did they set, only to watch you rise higher? When Daniel's excellence threatened the satraps, they conspired to frame him, yet the lions refused to bite what heaven had protected. Could it be that your spiritual clarity was the one thing their manipulation couldn't duplicate? Pope Gregory I, one of the most influential leaders of the early church, was known for his integrity and charity. Despite immense power, he insisted on being called servant of the servants of God. Historians note that many accused him of being overly humble, suspecting political motive, but history proved his humility was authentic. How many people in your life assumed your gentleness was weakness until they realized it was strength restrained? Like Gregory, you weren't performing holiness. You were embodying it. Daily, quietly, sacrificially. And that sacred consistency made them uncomfortable. Someone like Clarissa, a mid-level corporate administrator in Atlanta, knows this humiliation intimately. For years, her co-workers gossiped about her refusal to engage in office politics. When she landed a senior promotion after a private endorsement from the CEO, everything changed. The same people who mocked her prayer life now wanted her favor, and one by one, they realized she wasn't faking character to get ahead. Her character was the reason she'd been chosen. How many Clarissas are walking among us, underestimated until heaven's spotlight finds them? Your purity, like a snow-covered peak, untouched by footprints, remains unshaken even when the storms gather around it. And like the resilience of a tree whose roots drink deep beneath a winter's frost, your unseen depth kept you standing when others fell. Did they ever ask how you kept blooming without applause? Did it bother them that while they needed to be seen, you were content being true? Elijah stood alone on Mount Carmel, confronting false prophets while carrying a fire no one saw coming. 1 Kings 18:39 tells us that when the fire of God fell, the people cried out, "The Lord, He is God." It wasn't Elijah's volume, but his authenticity that provoked heaven's response. And like Elijah, you didn't fight for attention, you stood firm in identity. When the fire hits your life, who will be forced to say, "God was with them all along"? When Maya Angelou, a poet, author, and civil rights activist, was asked how she remained so gracious despite deep betrayals, she replied, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Your presence left a mark long before your words did. And now, those who doubted you are haunted by the memory of your unwavering peace. You never had to convince anyone of your authenticity. Time did the work for you. And now that truth has arrived. The very ones who doubted you are left exposed, not because you shamed them, but because your light was never dimmed by their shade. You were real, and they know it now. But the scaffolding of their suspicions is collapsing, one silent revelation at a time. Every strategy they devised, every moment crafted to unmask you, has only highlighted what they tried to deny. You are exactly who you've always claimed to be. What do they do now that your innocence has remained intact, even under microscopic scrutiny? Each failed trap became a mirror, not to reveal your weakness, but to confront their own distortion. They watched, waited, baited, and yet you passed every hidden test without knowing the exam had even begun. How do they fight someone who's not even playing? Your strength wasn't in performance, it was in presence, and that's what unraveled them. They wore masks for survival, tailored personas for applause. But you walked in raw, radiant truth. You didn't need to hide. That's the part they never prepared for, because your existence calm, kind, whole has become a mirror, exposing the disfigured compromises they've long called strategy. How many times did they rehearse ways to catch you slipping, only to realize the slip was in their own character? Can someone else's integrity make us painfully aware of where we lost ours? When Saul saw David's unshakable favor, he couldn't stand it. Despite David's loyalty, Saul threw spears of accusation from the shadows of insecurity. And yet, 1 Samuel 18:14 says, David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. What kind of warfare erupts when your peace makes others panic? And what does it say about your light that darkness needs such a plan to extinguish it? Peter, too, had his moment of denial, not out of hatred, but fear of not being worthy of Christ's purity. After denying Jesus 3 times, he wept bitterly, not because Jesus condemned him, but because grace confronted his shame. Later, in John 21, Jesus restores Peter, not with punishment, but purpose, asking 3 times, "Do you love me?" You can see how some people don't try to destroy you, but worship a version of you so high they forget they too were made in the image of God. Can admiration be its own prison? Job's story proves that authenticity doesn't prevent suffering, it purifies it. His friends suspected hidden sin. His wife urged him to curse God and die. But Job's heart held firm. Job 23:10 declares, "But he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold." The gold of your spirit is beginning to show through the fire, and now they can't unsee it. How many questioned your light until their own darkness made it undeniable? Joseph also faced doubters from within his own bloodline. His brothers staged his downfall because they couldn't believe in the dreamer he truly was. But in the end, he said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." You've walked that same path, misunderstood, mishandled, but never malnourished in the spirit. Doesn't it trouble them now that the person they called too pure is the one God kept promoting? In the early 1902 G.K. Chesterton, a British writer and theologian, was known for his wit and deep moral clarity. When critics accused him of being naive in his optimism, he responded, "The only courage worth calling courage must necessarily mean that the soul passes a breaking point and does not break. You've crossed that point more times than they know, not with fire, but with restraint, and that's the part that haunts them. You never needed revenge to be redeemed." Meanwhile, Ella Baker, a civil rights strategist who trained leaders like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., was often overlooked because she refused the spotlight. Many dismissed her influence until they realized that every speech, every protest, every breakthrough rested quietly on her organizational backbone. Her humility wasn't weakness, it was architecture, just like you. She didn't fight for visibility. She fortified legacy. Talia, a marketing director in Barcelona, had a co-worker who silently admired her. He saw how she never gossiped, never took shortcuts, and always honored interns with the same dignity as CEOs. One night, after his own career unraveled from a bribery scandal, he said, "You made me want to be better, but I never believed I deserved to stand beside you. And your spirit, bright but never boastful, held up a mirror not to shame, but to awaken." Another is Lionel, a school teacher in Johannesburg, who once told his wife, "I don't understand how she still smiles. She's been passed over 3 times for promotion, yet shows up early every day and covers for others." He never told you this, but he stopped drinking the day he realized you were walking through storms he wouldn't survive. Some people change in silence because your example broke their excuses. You are like the ocean floor, undisturbed by the waves thrashing above. The deeper they dive into your life, the more stillness they find. And you're also the mountain sunflower, rooming between barren rocks, defying all odds with quiet splendor. How many people are secretly studying the way you keep growing in droughts? How many once doubted you, now kneeling in the garden, your endurance watered? Their theory has died, their test has failed, and your existence is now the evidence you weren't performing. You were always becoming. To them, you're orbiting in galaxies they've never been allowed to enter, surrounded by people they consider shinier, louder, more celebrated. In their private calculations, you belong to a world where only the flawless thrive. And yet, every time you speak to them, something in their guarded shell begins to loosen. You remember their name. You laugh at their quiet jokes. You look them in the eye when they feel invisible. You don't just tolerate their presence, you honor it. What kind of soul remembers the quiet ones when the room is loud? They've searched your face for superiority and found none. You've never used your confidence to elevate yourself or belittle them. Your strength doesn't mock weakness, it makes room for it. Still, they've constructed a quiet wall between you, convinced they'll never be enough. Why does love from someone like you feel so dangerous? Why does being seen so deeply feel more vulnerable than being ignored? For years, they've been carrying a virus of thought, one that whispers that worth must be earned, that perfection is the price of affection. Somewhere along the way, someone taught them that flaws disqualify. So when they see you moving freely in your own imperfections, joyful, stable, grounded, it contradicts the internal lie they've nursed for decades. Could it be that they've never hated your light, but feared what it says about the darkness they've accepted? When Jesus sat with Zacchaeus, the tax collector was stunned not by a miracle, but by attention. Luke 19:5 says, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." That one sentence shattered years of self-loathing. Isn't it wild how one moment of being seen can rewrite a history of shame? When the woman with the alabaster jar wept at Jesus' feet, she didn't speak a word. Her tears carried the weight of every moment she was called unworthy. And yet, in Luke 7:47, Jesus declares, "Her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown." Love, not perfection, became the proof of transformation. How many people are one encounter away from realizing they were never disqualified? In the mid-20th century, Fred Rogers, a Presbyterian minister turned children's television icon, built an empire on gentleness. He spoke slowly. He asked real questions. And he looked into the camera and said things like, "I like you just the way you are." Millions wept, not because the message was complex, But because it was rare, you carry that same anointing, not through fame or platform, but through presence. Do you realize how disruptive your kindness truly is? Desmond Tutu, the South African archbishop and anti-apartheid activist, once wrote, "We are made for goodness," and yet, his fiercest resistance came from people who believed goodness was a fantasy. Sound familiar? Your sincerity makes cynics squirm because it exposes their coping mechanism. If goodness exists, then what have they been hiding behind? Ellie, a tech analyst in Tel Aviv, remembers the moment you stayed after a conference just to ask her about her project. It was a 5-minute conversation, but that night, she threw away the resignation letter she'd been writing for weeks. "She didn't flatter me," Ellie told a friend. "She just really listened. You didn't know it, but you saved more than a job. You saved a sense of purpose." Meanwhile, in Toronto, Marco, a 42-year-old barista with a poetry degree and a broken heart, had labeled every joyful person as fake. But after watching you defend a homeless man being mocked outside the cafe, he told his partner, "Maybe there are people who don't have an angle." He didn't speak to you, but something cracked open inside. You are like the northern lights, visible only in darkness, yet drawing souls upward with silent wonder, and like a river that cuts through ancient rock, not by force, but by persistence. Your presence erodes the sediment of shame in others. Can someone's healing begin just by standing near someone whole? And what if your grace was never meant to fix them, but to unlock what God already placed within? That breakthrough is coming. The one who's afraid of being known will discover that love was never about perfection, it was about permission. And then there's the third person, the cynic, the one who's made armor out of sarcasm and comfort out of skepticism. Their shift might be the most radical of all, because when someone's built a life on doubting sincerity, what happens when they finally meet the real thing, but you don't align with the lens through which they've always viewed the world? You don't just confuse them, you confront a worldview they spent years constructing. You walk in integrity without demanding applause. You extend kindness without an ulterior motive. You are the living contradiction of their cynicism. How do you explain someone who does good without needing to be noticed? What if your presence isn't just unusual, but disruptive to the emotional armor they've relied on for survival? Watching you has felt like watching gravity malfunction, as if something deeply foundational about their understanding of humanity is breaking down. You are quiet evidence that not all light is artificial, and now, their most sacred belief that everyone is performing is losing credibility. Could it be that their cynicism isn't wisdom but an unhealed wound? And if so, how many years have they spent mistaking self-protection for discernment? They've learned to expect betrayal like clockwork. Relationships were merely chessboards, every kindness a move, every compliment a setup. But you didn't play. You just showed up, again and again, without needing to win. You didn't flatter. You didn't negotiate your goodness. You simply were. And now, they're sitting in silence, staring at the terrifying possibility. What if real connection had always been possible, and they were the one who kept locking the door? Thomas, the disciple, has been remembered more for his doubt than his devotion. But in John 20:27, Jesus invites him to touch his wounds, saying, "Stop doubting and believe." Thomas didn't just doubt the resurrection, he doubted the reliability of hope, just like the cynic in your life. He needed something tangible to reawaken belief. Isn't it powerful that Jesus didn't scold him for skepticism, but gave him evidence through intimacy? Then there's Jonah, who ran not because he lacked faith, but because he had too much bitterness to accept that God's goodness could extend to Nineveh. In Jonah 4, when God shows mercy, Jonah is furious. How often do people reject healing? Not because it isn't available, but because they've decided they're not ready to forgive the past that shaped them. Anthony Bourdain, the late chef and storyteller, once confessed in an interview that he believed sincerity was always a facade, that everyone's selling something. And yet, he was drawn toward people who lived with raw honesty. Behind his sarcasm was a hunger for something real. You bring that same disturbance to those who've lived armored proof that sincerity isn't a marketing strategy, but a spiritual frequency. Andrei Tarkovsky, the legendary Russian filmmaker, believed that truth could be felt more than explained. In his journals, he wrote, "The artist exists because the world is not perfect." He understood that light irritates the eyes of those who've adapted to shadows. You are a walking irritation to those who've made bitterness their home, not because you wound them, but because you remind them healing is possible. Lauren, a paralegal in Denver, grew up believing that every act of kindness came with a hidden fee. So when you defended her in a client meeting without asking anything in return, she waited weeks for the backlash. It never came, and slowly, her anxiety turned to awe. She began bringing her lunch from home, not because she couldn't afford restaurants, but because she wanted space to talk to you. In Nairobi, Musa, a former journaliste turned bartender, overheard you once telling a stranger, "You don't have to earn rest." That sentence haunted him. He'd spent years grinding to prove he was worth loving. That night, he cried in the storeroom, then signed up for counseling the next day. You never knew, but heaven did. You are like a glacier, moving slowly, but reshaping everything beneath you with quiet force. And like the desert rain that falls without thunder, your presence doesn't announce itself, but it changes everything it touches. How many others have you disrupted into healing just by existing in their orbit? And what if your calm wasn't weakness but the sound of their walls crumbling? Each of the three is approaching a sacred crossroads. The investigator, the admirer, and the cynic, all are finding their own narratives dismantled. But what's being rewritten was never about you. Your existence simply exposed where their pain had been hiding. You weren't the wound. You were the light that made it visible. The investigator wasn't born suspicious. His lens was carved in a house full of secrets where smiles masked betrayals and trust was a setup for pain. He learned to scan every word, analyze every motive, because truth was rarely what it claimed to be. The admirer wasn't always insecure. She was raised in a system where praise was performance-based, where affection only arrived on the heels of excellence. She internalized the idea that she had to earn love like a wage, and the cynic, his skepticism is just armor welded by years of betrayal. Doors he trusted slammed. People he believed in collapsed. So he built walls, not out of pride, abuse survival. What happens when someone who didn't create their wounds becomes the one who exposes them? How does healing begin when the catalyst was never trying to fix you, just being true to themselves? That's what you've done. Not with sermons, not with strategies, but with steady presence, without knowing. You've become a prophetic interruption to their emotional routines. Is it possible that someone could reflect God's nature simply by walking in their own? Jesus never told the bleeding woman to prove herself. She reached through the crowd and touched the hem of his garment. And Mark 5:34 records his response, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." He didn't test her, question her, or correct her. He called her daughter. That moment healed more than her body. It healed her identity. Could someone's quiet faith in who you are unlock places in others they were told could never open? Then there's Ruth, who followed Naomi into a foreign land with nothing but loyalty and hope. In Ruth 2, Boaz saw her humility and said, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done." Ruth wasn't performing. She was surviving with dignity, and that was enough to attract favor. You, too, have been walking in quiet alignment, unaware that others were watching and finding courage through your unpolished grace. Nelson Mandela, after 27 years in prison, emerged without bitterness. When asked how he forgave, he said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. You've been like that, free from vengeance, untouched by ego, and that inner freedom has unsettled those still bound by comparison and control. Isn't it strange how someone else's peace can feel like confrontation to those addicted to chaos?" Jane Goodall, the renowned primatologist, once shared that her years in the jungle taught her more about human nature than any academic degree. She said, "What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. You've made a difference without knowing it by choosing truth over performance, consistency over applause. Could your very decision to be real be transforming someone else's worldview?" Maria, a young graphic designer in Lisbon, struggled with body shame for years. One day, you complimented her artwork, specifically her eye for balance. She cried in the restroom, not because of the compliment, but because it was the first time someone saw her value beyond appearance. You didn't know, but she started drawing again. Jabari, a gym owner in Chicago, overheard you gently correcting someone who mocked a struggling client. "Everyone's growing at their own pace," you said. That night, Jabari looked at himself in the mirror and whispered, "So am I." The next morning, he called his estranged father. "You weren't trying to be a catalyst. You were just being kind. You are like a campfire in the wilderness, unassuming, but magnetic. People gather not because you demand them, but because your warmth makes them remember they're human. And you are like the tide pulling broken shells out of hiding, polishing them with presence. Can light confront pain without speaking? Can love convict without demanding? The truth is wild. You had no idea. You weren't orchestrating any of this. You were just living. No pretense, no spectacle, no manipulation, and yet your life has become a mirror, gently revealing the parts of others that still ache, not because you pointed at their wounds, but because you never flinched from your own. You are the evidence that healing is possible. You didn't orchestrate any of this with speeches, tactics, or grand gestures. You never needed a stage. It was your authenticity, unfiltered, Unshaken, unscripted, that started this holy unraveling. While others studied you like a specimen, dissecting your motives and holding your silence up to the light like a counterfeit bill, you simply stayed grounded. While they whispered theories in back rooms, you offered kindness in plain sight. You didn't retaliate. You didn't perform. You just were. Is it possible that in a world addicted to image, your quiet integrity became the loudest sound in the room? You've shown what it means to be rather than prove. Your stability wasn't for applause. Your compassion wasn't rehearsed. It came from a place they can't fabricate. Spiritual congruence. And now, the moment of convergence is near. The investigator, the one who studied you like a case file, has prepared what they believe is their final, definitive test. It's calculated, strategic, A moral fork in the road where most choose personal gain. They're waiting, pen poised, ready to record your collapse. But will they be ready for what comes next? When the moment arrives, you won't hesitate. You'll choose principle over profit, truth over temptation. Not as a performance, but as a default. Because you've long been governed by a code the world didn't give you and can't take away. Proverbs 10:9 says, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." That moment will not expose you, it will expose them to something deeper. What if the test they designed to break you ends up breaking the lie they believed about humanity? Like when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood before Nebuchadnezzar's furnace in Daniel 3, refusing to bow to the idol, even under threat of death. They didn't stage a rebellion, they simply said, "Even if he does not rescue us, we will not serve your gods." They weren't trying to prove anything, they just knew who they were. And when the flames came, they didn't just survive, they walked in fire with a fourth figure beside them. Or consider Nehemiah, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem while facing constant threats and sabotage. In Nehemiah 6, when enemies tried to lure him into a trap, he replied, "I am doing a great work and I cannot come down." Like him, you've stayed on the wall, unmoved by distraction. Your consistency is your answer, and that terrifies those still trying to find your angle. Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian who hid Jews during the Holocaust, was once asked how she managed to stay so calm while risking her life. She replied, "Worry does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it empties today of its strength." Your peace isn't passive, it's powerful. You've traded anxiety for assignment, and now others are beginning to feel that strength as a quiet pressure on their conscience. Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, grew up in public housing and watched his father suffer humiliating job losses. That pain shaped his life mission, to build a company where workers felt human dignity. He said, "Success is best when it's shared." You've modeled that, living in a way where your values lead your victories. What kind of success survives scrutiny? The kind built on conviction, not compromise. David, a security contractor in Dubai, designed a final ethics drill for a colleague. He mistrusted you. He was sure you'd take the bait, a shortcut that looked noble but required small dishonesty. But when you chose transparency, he couldn't speak. Later, he told his sister, it wasn't just that she chose right, it's that it never even looked hard for her. That day, he deleted the encrypted file he'd been building against you. Chiara, a university professor in Florence, once wrote a confidential review of your project, fully expecting to uncover flaws. But when she saw your decisions, all of them rooted in service, honesty, and clarity, she paused. Her journal that night read, "I was looking for the seams and found only tapestry." She's not pretending. She's placed. Her own writing changed after that, less guarded, more human. You are like bedrock, quietly holding the weight of what others build, without shifting, and like sunrise over snow-covered fields, your presence softens what was frozen in others without force, without fanfare. Can a person walk in so much truth that it rearranges other people's lies? Can integrity become its own kind of testimony? This final test won't reveal a surprise. It will confirm what heaven has always known, that for you, righteousness is not a strategy. It is spiritual oxygen. You breathe it, walk it, and live it without agenda. Because integrity is not your method, it's your identity. In that sacred instant, when they observe you navigating the moral maze they architected with surgical precision, expecting to catch your foot stumble, they witness something entirely unexpected. You walk through it, slowly, intentionally, without flinching. You don't rush. You don't justify. You don't seek applause. You simply remain who you've always been, grounded, principled, quietly immovable. And in that moment, something fractures not in you, but in them. What happens when a worldview, constructed from years of suspicion, can no longer hold the weight of truth? They crafted this final trial as their masterpiece, one they believed would prove what they've always claimed, that everyone is hiding something, that goodness is camouflage, that integrity is manipulation dressed in poetry. But when you emerge from their labyrinth, not only unscathed, but unchanged, their mental scaffolding begins to collapse, not because you exposed them, but because your consistency made their illusions impossible to sustain. How many people do you touch, not by confrontation, but by quiet contradiction? Saul once threw spears at David, not because David failed, but because he didn't. The music David played soothed Saul's torment, but it also reminded him of everything he wasn't willing to become. 1 Samuel 18:12 says, Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. You've stirred the same tension in the investigator, not through aggression, but through alignment. In John 8, the Pharisees dragged a woman caught in adultery before Jesus, trying to trap him with law and public scrutiny. But he bent down and wrote in the dust. Then he said, Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. One by one, they walked away. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just mirrored their motives back to them. Like him, you didn't fight their trap. You exposed their fear by staying whole. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German pastor who opposed the Nazi regime, once said, Your life as a Christian should make non-believers question their disbelief in God. You've done the same without sermon or spectacle. You've made someone who thought truth was extinct suddenly question the very roots of their cynicism. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the acclaimed Nigerian author, once wrote, The problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. The investigator didn't just misjudge you, they reduced you to an idea. But now that idea is dissolving in real time. What do you do when the story you wrote in your head about someone no longer matches the truth standing in front of you? Leandro, a software engineer in São Paulo, had always seen people as variables code to be decrypted. He trusted patterns, not people. But after months of watching you choose the harder right over the easier wrong, he found himself deleting the risk matrix he'd built on your behavior. He told his mentor, She's not an equation, she's a compass. That was the first time he'd cried in 12 years. Alma, a political journalist in Prague, built her career exposing corruption. Her instinct was always to look for the lie beneath the smile, but after a project where you refused a lucrative deal that violated your values, she wrote in her personal notes, I saw someone do what I stopped believing was possible. She chose truth at a cost. That day, Alma took off the necklace she'd worn since her divorce, one engraved with the word detached. You are like volcanic rock formed in fire, cooled in stillness, unbreakable without being loud, and you are like a lantern in thick fog, not yelling direction but making the path visible by simply standing. Can integrity melt suspicion without a word? Can your quietness do what their shouting never could? Now they see it. They weren't pursuing truth. They were projecting wounds. The chase was never about you. It was about silencing their own ache. And now, that ache has a face, yours, not because you caused it, but because you exposed what was hidden. You didn't pass their test, you revealed their soul. It was never really about you. It was always about silencing the deep, unrelenting discomfort. Your authenticity awakened in them, your quiet alignment with yourself, without striving, without spectacle, became a spiritual provocation. Just by walking in truth, you triggered every false narrative they had ever learned to survive by. Is it possible that a soul walking in alignment can unravel another soul simply by existing? You didn't expose their dishonesty by accusation, you exposed it by contrast. While they wore masks of competence and cloaks of moral superiority, you showed up unamored, unafraid, uninterested in games. That kind of presence doesn't demand confrontation, it evokes it. Proverbs 27:19. As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. And your life has reflected something they could no longer pretend wasn't missing in their own. Now the armor crumbles. The cool, controlled composure that marked their every interaction has been shattered. Where once they moved with precision and poise, now their steps falter. Their eyes are unsettled. Their voice shakes. Those who watch them with admiration or suspicion, friends, peers, subordinates, begin to ask the question, what happened to make someone so sure, so visibly undone? Can the truth be so powerful it fractures what years of pride have protected? Like King Herod, who listened to John the Baptist, not because he wanted repentance, but because something in John's bold purity made him uneasy. Mark 6:20 says, Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. But fear without surrender becomes torment. And that's what you've stirred, not judgment, but holy tension, a mirror they can no longer look away from. Like Pharaoh, who hardened his heart repeatedly in Exodus, not because he didn't see signs, but because surrender would mean tearing down the empire of ego he built with his own hands. And yet, when God parted the sea and protected his people, Pharaoh's entire narrative collapsed in the waters. You didn't fight this investigator's empire. You just walked through the sea they didn't believe could part. And that is what's breaking them. James Baldwin, the American writer and activist, once said, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read, that's what's happening to the one who admired you silently. They're reading a new story now, one where their self-rejection isn't fact, but inherited fiction." What happens when someone realizes they've spent their life running from the kind of love that never asked them to earn anything? Henry Nouwen, the Catholic priest and spiritual author, wrote, "You are not what you do. You are not what you have. You are not what people say about you. You are the beloved of God, and your existence, gentle and uncalculated, is becoming a living epistle to those who thought value had to be achieved. The admirer is awakening to a possibility they never dared hold, that they might have always been enough." Sophia, an art curator in Lyon, grew up being told she was too quiet, too plain, too invisible to matter. Watching how you made space for the overlooked shattered her internal script. One night, after an event, you handed her a note that read, "Thank you for what you see that others miss." She didn't speak, but she never forgot. That note became a bookmark in her journal, a sacred reminder that attention doesn't have to be loud to be holy. Jalen, a logistics manager in Detroit, had admired you from a distance, always assuming your grace was reserved for greater minds and stronger souls. But after hearing you speak kindly to the janitor everyone else ignored, Something inside him began to shift. If she could see him? He whispered to himself. Maybe she could see me. That sentence opened a door in his heart, long rusted shut. You are like the moon quietly orbiting, never begging for attention, yet illuminating entire landscapes. And you are like a deep forest spring, still and unnoticed, until someone desperate for water stumbles upon your clarity. Could it be that your light didn't just confront darkness, but healed those who had forgotten they were allowed to shine? The mask has fallen, the lie has cracked, and now both the investigator and the admirer stand in the ruins of their assumptions, not because you forced a revelation, but because your truth created one. You didn't change them. You reminded them who they were before the wound. Meanwhile, the cynic stands at the edges of the unfolding transformation, arms crossed, jaw tight, heart fortified behind decades of silent vows. They've always believed that trust was for the naive and intimacy, a trap dressed in sentiment. But now, something within them begins to stir. They watch it all unfold, the unraveling of the investigator, the awakening of the admirer, and suddenly they're no longer immune. A choice is pressing against their ribcage. Will they dig deeper into their fortress of doubt? Or will they take the terrifying, beautiful risk of believing? What if what they've seen in you isn't an exception but a doorway? Could the path you've modeled be more than rare? Could it be real and accessible? Jeremiah 6:16 echoes. Stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is, and walk in it. And you will find rest for your souls. That's where they are now, standing, unsure, trembling at the edge of the very thing they claimed didn't exist. How many years have they denied the very longing they now feel pulsing behind their defenses? And then, the whispers start to shift. People who once watched you from the shadows, curious, distant, uncertain, begin to step into the light. They speak, not with flattery, but with testimony. Stories rise like embers of the time you noticed someone no one else saw, of how you stayed when others left, of how you never adjusted your light for applause. These aren't rumors, they're receipts. Matthew 7:20 reminds us, by their fruit you will recognize them. And now, the fruit is undeniable. When Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a borrowed donkey, no press release preceded him, and yet the people shouted, Hosanna, not because of promotion, but because of presence. His consistency had carried power. His name carried weight. Not by force, but by evidence. You've walked in that same rhythm, not seeking clout, but becoming credible through congruence. Rosa Parks, long before the bus, was known in her community for her dignity and devotion. The moment she refused to move wasn't spontaneous, it was a culmination. Those who knew her weren't surprised by her courage, they'd seen it in her daily life. That's what's happening now. Your quiet integrity has reached critical mass, and now your name begins to carry authority, not manufactured, but earned. Yo-Yo Ma, the celebrated cellist, once said, integrity is when what you think and what you say and what you do are one in your life. That alignment has become sacred music, subtle but unforgettable, and those who used to observe from behind glass are now leaning closer, not to inspect, but to honor. Can a name become weighty, not because it is branded, but because it is burdened with truth? Marwan, a film producer in Cairo, once warned his team to watch her, she's too clean to be real. But months later, after you stood between a rival and an unjust firing, he changed his tone. She's the realest thing I've seen in this industry," he admitted in a team call, voice thick with emotion. That same week, he cut ties with a client known for shady ethics. Something shifted. Isabel, a school principal in Montreal. I had never spoken to you directly, but she'd watched from afar. Noting the way your students lit up after each interaction, after hearing 3 separate parents praise your influence, she finally sat down and wrote you a note. "I underestimated you. You didn't need a title to have impact. You lead like you've already been seen by God. You are like tectonic movement, slow, unseen, but reshaping landscapes beneath the surface, and you are like myrrh in the air, carrying sacred scent long after you've left the room. Could your presence rewrite the reputations others tried to assign you? Could the echo of your consistency outlive their critique? And now, what was once theory is becoming testimony. The investigator's narrative collapses beneath the weight of eyewitness accounts. The admirer sees worth where they once saw disqualification. And the cynic, they're cracking. Light is seeping through, and all 3 are nearing something irreversible. In the days to come, on a divine timeline that feels both accelerated and destined, each of them will make a decision, not just about you, but about who they are in your presence. Your name, Unsequestioned, now carries kingdom weight, not because of performance, but because you've lived as proof that integrity, love, and truth are not rare, they're possible. The moment finally arrives. The investigator doesn't just approach you, feel their internal surrender before their mouth opens. There's no pretense in their posture, no mask in their tone. What spills out is not an apology dressed in diplomacy, but a confession soaked in trembling truth. They begin listing each test, each manipulation, every whispered conversation where your name was dissected like a subject, not a soul. And then they say the words no one expected. "I couldn't believe someone like you could actually exist." What do you say when the person who once built an emotional trial around you now seeks your guidance? When the one who tested your spirit now asks to learn from it? Their eyes don't plead for forgiveness, they plead for formation. They admit they no longer know how to discern without suspicion, how to recognize goodness without immediately questioning its motive. James 3:17 says, "But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason." And now they want to learn how to walk in that wisdom, the kind you've modeled without agenda. Could the one who once tried to prove you false now be your student in truth? Could the wall breaker now become a builder? Then comes the admirer, no longer shrouded in longing silence. Their voice trembles, not from performance, but from years of self-doubt, finally crumbling. They don't just speak affection, they tell the whole story. The late nights they rehearsed messages they never sent. The way your presence both comforted and convicted them. They speak of the internal voice that said, "Why would someone like that choose someone like me?" And then they say it, "I don't want to watch you from the edge anymore. I want to grow beside you." They don't ask for romance. They ask for room. Ruth 1:16 echoes in their voice. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay," not from desperation, but from devotion, rooted not in fantasy, but in willingness to evolve. Isn't it holy when someone doesn't just admire your strength, but wants to mature enough to carry it beside you? Frederick Douglass, once enslaved, later became one of the most powerful voices in abolition and transformation. He said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men, but you, by living with transparency and consistency, have begun to do both, rebuild the broken and strengthen the willing. You didn't preach freedom, You walked in it until others could see their chains. Florence Nightingale, the pioneer of modern nursing, was told again and again that compassion was weakness. But she persisted. Her presence during wartime didn't just heal bodies, it restored dignity. And much like her, you've walked into battlegrounds, not with weapons, but with unwavering presence. And now the wounded are coming forward not to be impressed, but to be taught. In Auckland, Matteo, a riskanalyst, once built an emotional firewall so thick he couldn't feel anything anymore. But after confessing his misjudgment to you, he asks, how do you live open without getting destroyed? It's not an academic question, it's a soul's plea. And your answer, unspoken, is your walk. Meanwhile, Leah, a piano teacher in Budapest, finally sends the message she's written and deleted 100 times. I don't want to be perfect. She types, I just want to try with you. Is there room for someone who's still learning how to be brave? And when she presses send, she doesn't expect a miracle, only a response from someone who once stood at the edge of fear and chose to leap. You are like fresh soil, inviting roots, not demanding bloom, and like a mountain sunrise, gentle, steady, revealing everything in new light. Could it be that your transparency has made honesty contagious? Could it be that your vulnerability has become the environment where transformation feels safe? Now the investigator seeks to rebuild what they once tried to unravel. The admirer seeks to walk with you, no longer trapped behind awe. And beneath it all is the truth. You didn't win them. You freed them by being who God made you to be. And then, what no one expected happens. The cynic, the one who scoffed the loudest, who raised an eyebrow at every gesture of sincerity, walks toward you, not as a critic, but as a student. Their voice is unsure but sincere, their eyes full of a strange combination of grief and awe. How did you become like this? They ask. How did you keep your heart intact in a world that rewards masks? They don't want your perfection, they want your process. They're not asking for performance, they're asking for truth. Could it be that the greatest skeptic now hungers to evolve in the very soil they once rejected? They want to believe change is possible, not just in theory, but in themselves. They want to believe that becoming whole isn't reserved for the pure of heart, but offered to the broken, the bitter, the once blind. Ezekiel 36-26 whispers, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. The hardened are softening, and you, without effort, have become their evidence. What you choose next is no longer just about them. It's about you. You now stand at a divine intersection. There are 3 paths ahead, not external, but deeply spiritual. The first is the path of grace. You could respond with radical compassion, offering not only forgiveness, but mentorship, affirmation, restoration. Romans 12:20-16. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Imagine what might happen if suspicion is turned into trust, and fear transformed into courage, not by force, but by your gentleness. The second path is the boundary of wisdom. You could say yes with conditions. You could extend mercy and clarity, acknowledging their growth while still honoring the pain they caused. Because authenticity doesn't mean amnesia. It means discernment. Can you walk in love and still protect your peace? Can you be a well without letting others pollute the water? Jesus, when Peter was restored after denying him, didn't simply say, I forgive you. He also said, feed my sheep. He offered trust, but he also offered responsibility. That was both grace and accountability, like Jesus. You've now become someone who doesn't just forgive you, entrust. Wisely, not quickly, not blindly, but with sacred clarity. Paul and Barnabas, in Acts 15, faced a tension in partnership. Though both righteous, they chose to part ways temporarily due to sharp disagreement. It wasn't hatred, it was strategy. Sometimes wisdom requires space before reunion. Sometimes forgiveness walks parallel with distance. Could honoring your journey mean knowing when proximity isn't the proof of healing? Brené Brown, research professor and author, once said, "Clear is kind, unclear is unkind." You now carry the responsibility of clarity, not for control, but for legacy. People are watching how you steward your influence, not in crowds, but in small moments like this. Will you answer their apology with pressure to restore instantly, or with intentional wisdom? Archbishop Oscar Romero, who stood for justice in El Salvador, once declared, "Peace is not the product of terror or fear. Peace is not the silence of cemeteries. Peace is the generous, tranquil contribution of all, to the good of all." And you now contribute not just to healing but to spiritual atmosphere. Your choice becomes generational echo. Noah, after surviving the flood, didn't build a temple. He built an altar. Your next move is not to return to what was, but to consecrate what is. Could you respond with grace and boundary at once, with love fierce enough to heal and firm enough to instruct? Because this isn't about revenge. It's about rhythm, the rhythm of stewardship. Amara, an editor in Lagos, who once publicly doubted your character, now sends you a message. You were the one who held the standard I tried to mock. I'm not asking for friendship. I'm asking for truth. And Elias, a medical student in Buenos Aires who long admired you from afar, finally speaks. Would you have room in your world for someone willing to grow in your light, even if I'm still stumbling in mine? You are like a lighthouse, rooted, radiant, and responsibly selective about who enters the harbor. And you are like gold refined, not to become soft, but to shine with discernment. Can the light that exposes also embrace? Can you show the way without being consumed by those who only now see it? This is your pivot. Not a test, but a trust. You don't just carry truth, you now decide how it's distributed. And that decision will shape not only your relationships, but your next elevation, under the weight of your response, whether grace, boundary, or wise discernment. Something deeper begins to unfold. These three are no longer just figures in a private drama. Their stories start echoing into the lives of many who've been quietly watching. Unsure if authenticity can survive in a world ruled by strategy and performance, you've stirred not just transformation in individuals, but a collective memory of what truth feels like the scent of rain on dry soil. Your consistency reminds people of something ancient, something sacred. That integrity still breathes among us. The one who doubted you becomes a living example of what it means to turn suspicion into surrender. The one who adored you in silence learns that vulnerability, not perfection, is the bridge to belonging. And the one who mocked goodness begins to walk haltingly, clumsily toward becoming good. And people begin to take notice. How could they not? Transformation, when it's real, cannot be hidden. What if the ripple you're creating doesn't end here? What if these three were simply the first to crack open? Could your quiet authenticity ignite restoration in places you'll never step? In homes where trust was lost, in boardrooms where manipulation thrived, in hearts that haven't dared hope in decades? Do you realize that every small act of integrity you made, declining the shortcut, defending someone when it cost you, choosing kindness instead of superiority, has been a sermon louder than any speech? Are you beginning to see that your life has been a kind of gospel written in body language, in eye contact, in silent decisions no one applauded? The Apostle Paul wrote, "You are our letter, written in our hearts, known and read by everyone." 2 Corinthians 3:2. He wasn't talking about words on a scroll. He was talking about people like you, living proof that the truth still walks among the wounded, that someone can be fully themselves, fully aligned, and still deeply impactful. That influence doesn't require a platform, only a soul rooted in heaven. Joseph, long before he became Pharaoh's advisor, was tested in private, sold by brothers, falsely accused, forgotten in prison, and yet in every place, he never stopped being himself. When his breakthrough came, he didn't need to become someone new. He only needed to stay aligned with the person he'd always been. Have you ever wondered how many people God promotes, not because they're flashy, but because they're faithful? Dame Cicely Saunders, the founder of modern hospice care, wasn't trying to be famous. As a nurse and social worker in post-war London, she simply noticed people were dying in pain and decided that dignity should not end at death. Her compassion created an entire global movement. Isn't that the same kind of revolution you're creating? Quietly. In spirit, people like Daniel faced lions because they refused to bend. People like Ruth abandoned everything familiar to follow honor. People like Jesus turned the other cheek, not because they were weak, but because love is the strongest kind of resistance. Are you starting to realize you're in their lineage? And somewhere across town, a woman named Roslyn is watching this story unfold. She doesn't know you, not directly, but she's heard whispers of someone who didn't bend, didn't break, didn't retaliate. She's been burned too many times to trust. But now she's considering something. If they exist, maybe I haven't seen everything yet. Her walls tremble. Another man, Elijah, not the prophet, but a real estate investor who once lost everything in a fraud scandal, is watching how you responded to betrayal. He's thinking about trying again, but differently this time, with ethics, with humility, with God. A child, 11 years old, hears your name in a kitchen prayer and asks, "Can I be like them when I grow up?" Because somehow they heard that truth lives somewhere out there, and they're hoping it's contagious. You didn't mean to become a mirror, but you are one, and the reflections you're producing are now walking around, talking to others, making different choices, and all because you refuse to be anything other than what God made you to be. You've triggered reformation through righteousness. Then you'll recognize something profound, that the transformation in others was never separate from your own, that by holding to your integrity in silence, under pressure, and without applause, you were not just passing a test, you were unlocking a realm where spiritual laws supersede human schemes, where heaven partners with authenticity, where alignment doesn't chase outcomes, it attracts them, and suddenly, what once felt like resistance becomes release. The weight you carried of being misunderstood, misused, or underestimated begins to lift. Why? Because it's no longer needed for your growth. You've outgrown the terrain where proving yourself was a survival mechanism. You now walk in a field where being yourself is enough, and that field is favor. Do you realize what's happening here? You're stepping into divine flow, the place where Psalm 23:5 becomes real. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. You're not seeking the table anymore. It's seeking you. And as people watch the overflow, they'll know it wasn't won through manipulation, shortcuts, or alliances. It was built in private, forged in pain, and sustained through obedience. Just as Ruth gleaned in the fields, unaware that Boaz was watching, you too have been laboring in obscurity, not knowing that heaven was observing. And just like Boaz instructed, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. Ruth 2:15. Heaven is now commanding opportunities to favor you, not as a reward for performance, but as a response to purity. It's what happened to Nelson Mandela. After years of imprisonment meant to break him, he emerged not bitter but wise, ready to build bridges where others sought revenge. And the world recognized something rare, a man who hadn't just survived oppression, but transformed through it. Isn't that what you've done too? You are becoming a touchstone for others' alignment, a visible parable of what integrity births when it's not abandoned. There will be people, some near, some across oceans, who realign their entire lives just from watching how you responded to pressure. Your story is becoming evidence that faithfulness, not forcefulness, leads to fulfillment. And this is only the beginning, because you didn't just endure the fire, you became fire, purified, luminous, and unafraid to illuminate. And when the light is pure, it doesn't just shine, it reveals, which means many are about to see more clearly than they ever have. You are now walking in the season where integrity becomes influence. And this, beloved, is where the unseen becomes undeniable. You didn't plan this ripple. You didn't ask to be a mirror, but your life lived in truth, not in spectacle, has become the answer to questions people didn't know they were allowed to ask. What if goodness exists? What if love doesn't require perfection? What if honesty is possible without pretense or agenda? Your presence has challenged assumptions, softened defenses, shattered projections. You didn't do it with speeches. You did it with consistency, with presence, with quiet strength. And now, as the cynic opens the door to belief, as the admirer releases the lie that they are unworthy, as the investigator lays down their armor and asks to learn from you, something cosmic is shifting. Because these three are not just individuals, they are archetypes of an entire generation trying to make sense of trust, love, and authenticity in a fractured world. Their transformation is a signal that the tide is turning, that maybe, just maybe, people are ready to remember what's real. And now you stand at the center, not as a hero seeking credit, but as a vessel who simply chose not to betray themselves. And because of that, heaven is responding. Suddenly, the things that used to drain you will no longer have access to your energy. The cycles that once kept you stuck will quietly dissolve. The people who felt distant will draw near, not out of demand, but resonance. The doors that remained closed will open, not because you forced them, but because your alignment called them forth. And you'll know, deeply and without doubt, that all of this is not coincidence. It is the fruit of obedience, of being who you are without apology, of staying grounded when it would have been easier to harden. This is what divine alignment looks like. It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's holy. So, if this word stirred something deep in you, if it met you in a place you didn't have language for, I want to invite you to participate in something sacred. If this message spoke to your spirit, please take a moment to like this video, not for vanity, but because it tells the algorithm that messages like this matter. If you know someone who needs this kind of clarity or encouragement, share it with them. Don't assume they've heard something like this before. Chances are they haven't. And if this channel has been a place of consistent nourishment for you, subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss what God is doing next. We're building something here that goes beyond content. It's a remnant, a movement, a returning. And for those of you who feel led to sow into this prophetic work, you can do so by clicking the Super Thanks button. Your support means we can keep creating this kind of deep, transformative content. But hear me clearly, whether you give or not. I see you, I honor you, and I thank you for simply being here, for taking the time, for having the courage to feel something real in a world that numbs everything sacred. So I bless you now. I bless your eyes to see truth without distortion. I bless your heart to love without fear. I bless your mind to think with clarity and discernment. And I bless your spirit to stand tall in the fullness of who you were created to be. May you walk forward, not with performance, but with presence, not to please, but to align, not to prove, but to embody. May everything that is not for you fall away without effort, and may everything that has been assigned to your name find you with ease. You were never asking for too much. You were just becoming someone who could no longer settle for less than what's holy. Keep walking, keep shining, keep being. Your life is awakening others, and this is just the beginning.